Welcome back to the 265th episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through some of the top stories, but we're going to do a little bit of a different format today. Normally we have a few different articles. Again, we're going to do a really heavy focus on one subject in particular, elections. This is something that we've been talking about as we get closer to the presidential election a lot, but now we're going to talk about how you can actually vote, who can vote, so on and so forth, because you hear a lot of different things. So, let's jump into our daily debate. Do you think people that are not citizens of the United States can vote? If you're on one side of the aisle, you hear one particular thing. If you're on the other side of the aisle, you hear another thing. I'll lay out what both sides say. One side says, no, it's illegal. It is federally illegal for non-citizens to vote. It's something that we don't need to worry about that much. The other side says, yeah, it may be federally illegal, but there are still ways to go about doing it. You can indeed vote if you are a non-citizen. And then the arguments devolve into, it's exceedingly rare, blah, 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 blah. So tell me where you stand. Tell me what you think. And you'll find out throughout the course of this that both sides are a little bit wrong. So, shocker, right? I can't believe that both sides are a little bit wrong. So, with that said, let's jump into our first article. This one is going to tell us that no, hey, you cannot. You cannot vote if you are not a citizen of the United States of America in federal elections. It's a little bit different on local elections, such as places like California. I believe New York is also doing a law currently that would allow people to vote in local municipalities such as school boards and things like that. But we're going to lay out both of these very quickly, and then we're going to go into the research, because I want to refute some of the things, and this is not that much research. I say a research episode. I spent probably an hour yesterday going through the different methods, and then I went back and spent another 30 minutes expanding on it today, finding the links, making sure everything was correct, actually finding a little bit more information, which is even more useful. So this article comes from the League of Women Voters of California. So, how it starts off, it kind of gives you a little bit of a Snoops vibe. It says, the claim, California is registering non-citizens to vote. The facts, as of November 8th, as the November 8th election approaches, some social media users are reviving concerns about people who are not legal citizens being allowed to vote. Among the latest false claims is that California, the nation's most populous state, is registering non-citizens ahead of the decisive midterms. And then it goes on to quote a few different people who I'm not going to read from because they have their perspective, which I think is a little latent. I want to get back to the actual reporting in here. Quote, still, federal law bans non-citizens, which includes green card and visa holders, from voting in federal elections. So it lays it out pretty simply there for us. It puts it out there in the plain language. If you are not a U.S. citizen, you are not allowed to vote. It is illegal. So, you made me think, okay, hey, well, conversation done, Alex. I mean, it's illegal for them to vote. Yes, it is illegal for them to vote. But does that stop people from actually registering to vote? Does that actually mean that the safeguards are in place to prevent it? So let's jump to another article that talks about this, which comes from Just the News. And the headline reads, Democrats deny non-citizens are voting in federal elections while Republicans seek to prevent it. And I'm just going to read the first part of this one because we're going to actually return to this to examine some of their claims afterwards. So one of the first quotes in the article is, quote, Democrats on the House Administrations Committee claimed during a hearing titled American Confidence in Elections, Preventing Non-Citizen Voting and Other Foreign Interference on Thursday that the discussion of non-citizen voting is an attempt by Republicans to undermine the results of the 2024 election. So they're saying, hey, this is preemptively laying the groundwork to say that Donald Trump lost. Quote, Rep. Joe Morole, I believe is how you pronounce his name, he's a Democrat of New York, said, quote, said flatly at the hearing that non-citizens are not voting in the United States elections and that Republicans are using the non-issue to explain why former President Donald Trump will lose the 2024 election. So they go on to talk about the process of the hearing a little bit more. I'm sure that if you are really passionate and you want to hear about the hearing, you can go watch it on C-SPAN and not have a whole article explain it. But they get into something a little bit more important here towards the middle part. Quote, the 2022 U.S. Census recorded 19.7 million citizens of voting age in the country, and that does not include non-citizens who don't participate in the census or falsely claim to be a citizen. Just the facts noted. So this is 19.7 million non-citizens of voting age across the country. They're pulling this from a study done by Just the Facts. Quote, however, according to a study by Just the Facts, 10 to 27% of non-citizens are registered to vote in the United States. About half of them, 5 to 13%, will illegally vote in the 2024 presidential, congressional elections. And that's a quote from the study. So, you may be saying, okay, well, hey, Alex, we just established a minute ago that it is illegal to vote. And this right here, they're not saying that it is legal to vote. They're saying that these people will illegally vote. They're saying that there are actually mechanisms in place which would allow them to vote. And that is where the conversation is. Not whether or not they are not allowed to vote. It is whether or not they actually choose to vote. So the question should then become, at least in my mind, it instantly becomes, why would they be allowed to vote? Why would anybody that is a non-citizen be allowed to vote? Well, obviously federal law says they're not, but maybe we should use the word capable. How would they even be capable of voting? How could you participate in the process of voting in the elections, even if it is illegal, without being a United States citizen? And this is where we get into the data behind which state have voter ID laws and which ones do not. So one of the contentious states that was talked about in the first article is California. I have right here, this is from the ncls.org, so the National Conference of State Legislators, and this is a map that tells you which states have voter ID laws and which do not. I will give a few examples. California, no documents required, and there is a range of 5. So we have the strictest, which is strict photo ID, strict non-photo ID. We have photo ID photo ID requested. And then there's another category before we get to no ID, which is ID requested, photo not required. So strict photo ID, Ohio, we're talking about the states like Georgia, North Carolina. This is something you're going to have to bring your driver's license, 100% strict ID. Then we have our non-ID but still strict. So we're talking about places like North Dakota. We're talking about Arizona, where you would have to have some sort of documentation that you are a resident. And for the most part, these are going to be more like citizen documents as well. So maybe it's a social security card. Maybe it's something that doesn't necessarily have your photo ID but still identifies you as a citizen. And they do vary from state to state, so I'm not trying to pretend like that covers all of them. Then there's photo ID requested. So we're talking about states like Texas. We're talking about Louisiana, Florida. And if you notice, some of the ones I listed there, they're pretty red states and they don't have strict photo ID laws. This has been a talking point of people on the right for a long time. Hey, they need a photo ID. But apparently the push hasn't gone through in those states yet. And then we get down to ID requested, photo not required. So this is something like Virginia, Kentucky, your Iowas. So we can see here, and I also mentioned the no documents earlier, so California, DC, Maryland. So you can see there's a wide variety here, which doesn't necessarily give us an insight as to whether or not it actually is harder or easier for non-citizens to vote. It's just saying what they're required, and it doesn't even specify how you would get some of these actually important IDs. So I'm going to do 2 specific test cases. We're going to look at New Mexico, and we're going to look at the District of Columbia. And the reason I think this is very, very important is because Even though both of them fall into the no document required to vote category, they have very different ways that they actually approach getting people to be able to be registered to vote in the case of DC, in their district, in the case of New Mexico, in their state. And this is where it is very important to look because, hey, if you're registered to vote, if actually registering to vote is a little bit more difficult, but you don't have to show ID when you go to the place, but you have to be on the registration rolls, then guess what? Even though, and there are plenty of other issues with it, I still think that this addresses the base issue, which is could people illegally vote? Because they would have to be on the registration or they would have to be on the voter rolls when they go to the location. Sure, somebody could falsely claim to be somebody else. You could make that argument, and I don't want to go down that road because that's a totally separate one. But when it comes to actually being able to vote, when it comes down to whether somebody would be able to get their name on the rolls, and we're assuming everybody's coming in pretty good faith, they have two very different approaches in District of Columbia versus New Mexico. So we'll go to the same National Conference of State Legislators website, and let's be clear, I will be putting all of these links in the description so you can go research this yourself. You don't just have to put your faith in me. At some point, I will put elements into these videos, but we are not quite there yet. So let's look at New Mexico. Voters must have state name and address after providing identification, which can be written or verbal confirmation of name, address, date of birth, and sign the polling book. So they have to sign the polling book. You also have to do that in California, but I said we're going to focus on District of Columbia. So the District of Columbia, all you have to do is sign the poll book. And what do election officials have to do? Because it says here, separate category, voters must, and that was the category I just read you. Now there's the election officials must. And what does it say for District of Columbia? None. So no strict scrutiny. And then in New Mexico, the opposite is the case. Announce name, confirm the voter is on the registration list. So there you go. In New Mexico, you have to be verified that you are on the voter registration list. And in DC, you just have to sign the poll book. So let's say that is the end of it. Well, it's not the end of it, but even if it was the end of it, that's a pretty big discrepancy. That's a pretty big difference. All you have to do is sign the poll book. You don't even have to verify your name or your address in DC versus having to do it in New Mexico. At least in New Mexico, they have to look on the voter rolls. So then the question becomes, how do you get on the voter rolls in this state? Because somebody could just say, oh yeah, no, it could be really easy to get on the voter rolls. You could be somebody who is not a citizen of the United States and then get on the voter rolls and go vote. So then there tacitly wouldn't be any difference between how you actually go about things. And let's even give a good faith interpretation that both people who come to the polls here, that in this fictitious scenario in DC and New Mexico, let's say they both present their photo ID, they present their driver's license, just to give a good faith example and also to really show the differences in the next stage that we're going to go to in the argument/research that I want to present. So we're going to go from the NCSL, and now we are going to go to the DMV website for both the DC metro area, DC, and for New Mexico. So in DC, what do you need to get a driver's license? Remember, we're going on the good faith assumption that both people in this scenario are presenting their driver's license. In order to get a driver's license, you have to have a proof of identity, full legal name, date of birth, and lawful presence. So what does that actual proof of ID need to be? It could be an expired U.S. passport or passport card. And I am reading off the list here. I'll skip over some of them, but I do want to give examples of ones that you may know off the top of your head. A U.S. birth certificate, a consular report with birth affirmed, a certificate of naturalization, a certificate of U.S. citizenship, or an unexpired foreign passport with accompanying visa, or an unexpired employment authorization card. The really important one there is foreign passport with accompanying visa. So you don't have to be a citizen, which let's be clear, it does make sense. It does make sense. If you are a person who is on a work visa and you're here in the United States all the time, but you still want to make sure that you are a citizen of the nation that you're coming from, say it's Great Britain, you're going to need to be able to drive. So we're going to have a mechanism in place that says, hey, I am here legally, or at least I am here on a visa, but I'm not necessarily a citizen yet, and I am wanting to drive around. Okay, so guess what? We're going to allow you to do that because you're going to add to our economy. We want you to be able to do your job. There are lots of reasons why that would be the case. Notice here, with a visa, so there are some restrictions there, and we're going off the good faith assumption that you are presenting your ID to the area, the DC people, when you're going in to vote. So let's go over to the New Mexico DMV. So what do you require? Legal identity and age, so the documents that provide that, and then the one that we're going to focus in here is the identification number. So it could be a social security number, a W-2 form, an SSA 1099, goodness gracious, or once again, a foreign passport with visa and an I-94. So, okay, hey, there you go. Look at that. That is saying right there that you also need a foreign passport with a visa. So I am legally here within the United States, and that's why I am able to get a driver's license. So this would seem to refute a lot of what people are saying, at least, which is, hey, if we're both presenting our legal IDs to the government agencies and we're both giving them or I guess in this case, technically when you're voting, it's not a government agency, it's your local community, but at the voter station, if we're going off that good faith argument that both people would do that in DC and New Mexico, well, both of the people that would have their photo IDs, their driver's license, they would have to, even if you're to assume that they are not a foreign national, they would at least have to present it with a visa, right? I mean, that seems pretty straightforward. And the question then becomes, okay, so that's how they want to show their IDs when they go there in the first place. Now we need to say both of them don't require IDs, so I want to work on that assumption rather than the good faith assumption where everybody shows their IDs, which would then verify that they are a person with an actual valid ID. And let's be 100% clear here. If you're not a U.S. citizen, you can't vote in elections legally anyway, but at least the mechanism is there where you could still show your photo ID, even if you're here on a visa. With this being said, and you're going on the good faith assumption that you're showing your ID, you could still technically vote if you are on the voter rolls in New Mexico. So then the question becomes, how do you get on the voter rolls in New Mexico? Because as we already established, DC, you don't have to be on the voter rolls. You don't have to do anything besides sign the ballot. So let's go to this last file, which can be found at United States Election Assistance Commission, it's a .gov website, so it's a federal organization that helps people out. And this is for the National Voter Registration Form. So I am working off the assumption, and let's be clear, this is an assumption, that these are going to be the rules that most people would have to participate in anyway in order to actually get their name on a voter roll normally. Actually, I would assume if you're going to vote by mail, it might need to be a little bit more stringent. But let's go to the requirements by state. So first, I want to go to DC because we were talking about DC, and it's also a great example of what you need. So right here, the ID number that would be required, there's a special box on this form. It's box number 6. The ID number that would be required is the federal law now requires, quote, that all voter registration applications must include either the applicant's driver's license number or the last 4 digits of their social security number. So now the federal law requires it. DC is also complying. So you could put in your driver's license number and that would be sufficient. And as we went through earlier, if you are a citizen that has an ID, no big deal. If you are a person from another country, you can still get the driver's license with a valid visa. So you're here on a visa, you can get a driver's license, and therefore you could vote in DC because that is the only type of registration information that you would have, or ID number in box number 6 of this registration form that you would have to provide. And let's jump to the one for New Mexico. How stringent are they? Because remember, they don't require photo IDs. So we did a good faith situation where you're presenting your photo ID. We did a bad faith or just a normal applying to adhering to the rules of the state situation where you don't actually show a photo ID, but you still have to be on the voter rolls in New Mexico. So what does it take to get onto the voter rolls in New Mexico? That becomes the next question, or at least that becomes the next logical question in my mind. Maybe not everybody agrees with me on that. So we'll go to New Mexico, and it says here that for a ID number, box number 6, that you will have to fill out, you are required to put in your full social security number. It is required. This registration card contains your social security number and will become part of your permanent voter registration records of your locality. So guess what? You have to have a social security number. Now, there are probably ways to get fake social security numbers, no doubt about that, but that is something unique to United States citizens. Things may change in the future, but right now, that is unique to a U.S. citizen. So, there we go. Look at that. If you want to be on the voter rolls in New Mexico, and you don't have to show your ID when you go there, all you have to do is say your name and your address and verify that you are on the voter rolls, you have to at least give your social security number when registering. Versus if you go to a place like DC and you don't have to present an ID, you don't actually have to present I'm already on the voter rolls. Is basically roll up and say, hey, I'm voting, and all you have to do is sign it. And let's be clear, if somebody who is an illegal resident within the United States, a person who is not a non-citizen, if they were to do that in DC, then guess what? That is illegal. It is federally illegal. They cannot do it under law. But that doesn't mean that they are not capable of it. Doesn't mean that the process is open to them being able to do it. And that's where the Republicans' concerns come from. That's where this conversation always gets derailed. Because people on the Democratic side, they say it is illegal. And then, guess what? The people on the Republican side are saying, okay, yeah, we're not disagreeing that it's illegal, but you're missing the point. The door is open. Guess what? It's illegal in most places, and especially in Virginia. If you go above, I believe it is 80, it is instantly reckless driving. That is illegal. Guess what? People do it all the time. People do it all the time. Just because something is illegal, it doesn't mean people don't, that doesn't mean that it stops them from actually doing it. Now, those rules are there in place, and people who do go 80 every once in a while do get pulled over. They do get caught, and it does deter some people from doing it. If somebody was to illegally vote and they were found out, yeah, they are definitely going to a federal prison, or they might even just be deported if they are able to track them down and they are a non-citizen of the United States. So I'm not trying to pretend as though, oh, well, the door's just open and everybody's doing it. But that's what the concern is. The door's open. Maybe we should close the door. And we did start this with California. So we started at the very beginning talking about California because that's where a lot of the conversation revolves around. So let's go to this form and let's look at California and what ID number requirement they have. And if we go here, their number 6 box, their ID number. When you register to vote, you must provide a California's driver's license or California identification card. And I have not looked up, because this is a spur of the moment thing, I have not actually looked up what the DMV requirements for California are. So we're going to spend 2 seconds. We're going to spend 2 seconds doing this because I want to prove how easy it is for you to go do this yourself. And I want to show you that if you wanted to sit here and go through every single state, it could probably take you, let's be clear, some of the websites are a little bit longer, but it would take you maybe an hour. And the only reason it took me a little bit more than an hour yesterday is it was, I was inexperienced. I didn't know what I was doing. So maybe we give you an hour for learn time and then maybe another hour to get it all locked in. So here's the ID checklist, real ID checklist off of the DMV of California's website. You could have a valid U.S. passport, a valid permanent residence card, a foreign passport with a visa, a certification of naturalization, a valid permanent residence card with a notice of action, approval notice, a U.S. birth certificate, a valid foreign passport stamped process for I-551. I don't actually know what all that means. So maybe it would take you a little bit longer to go through and do all those. But once again, we see a person who is here in the United States with a passport and a visa. Now, I think that this is where we're getting a little bit trickier here, because now I need to ask the question, since we're working our way back up to the front, I need to ask the question, okay, what do you actually have to have when you go to the California voter site? Because we've now established that even if you were to present a photo ID, you couldn't be somebody who was just here illegally. You would have to be here as someone with a passport from the country you're coming from, that's valid, and a visa. So, and that would get you a driver's license, which then could get you on the voter registration rolls. So do you actually have to be on those voter registration rolls in California? So we go back to our initial website, which is the National Conference of State Legislators, and it says here under voters must state name and address and sign the poll book. And then election officials must, oh, look at that, confirm voter is on the registration list. So California may not be the best example of what actually needs to be done. Maybe DC is a good example of where people could vote with a little bit less restrictions. So my point being that there are lots of narratives that go around this. There are lots of different talking points that aren't necessarily portraying things 100% accurately. Where Republicans do portray things accurately is that in California, there are non-citizens that are able to vote. It is just not on a statewide level or a federal level. It is on a municipality level, like I mentioned before. So we've been dancing around this narrative. We've explained how there are certain rules in certain places where you don't have to have an ID at all. All you have to do is sign the poll book. We've explained that in certain locations, you just have to have a driver's license to get onto those rolls. And then there are other places where you actually have to have a social security number. All of these groups here are within the groups of states slash districts slash localities, because DC is technically a district, but I'm just going to call it a locality, that do not require you to have any form of ID. And these would be vastly different in places that do require you to have ID. But my point being that we've examined 3 different cases here, and we have 3 wildly different variants, very different standards. And if you are a person who came here without a visa, in one place, it is extremely feasible that you would be able to vote with no issue. And in the other place that we mentioned, California, that has a little bit looser laws, they would require you to at least have a visa to get onto the registration roll, which we just established. You have to be on the registration roll in order to actually vote, or at least that is the job of the people who are at the election location to verify that you are on the registration list. And we also established in New Mexico that you have to be a United States citizen with a social security number to even get on the registration list, which will be checked by the people at the polling location when you go to vote. So 3 vastly different standards. But you see that in those 2 of those places, if you have a visa, technically you could vote. And if you're in one of those places, technically you could just vote without any of that. So it doesn't mean that the Republicans are fully lying. These are serious discussions that need to be had. Maybe it should be every state is like New Mexico, where you have to get on the registration roll beforehand. Even if you don't show a photo ID, you at least have to be on the registration roll beforehand, which in order to get on, there's stricter standards, aka you have to have a social security number when you register. I think that could be a middle ground, because some people say, well, hey, getting an ID is a little bit tricky for some people. Well, maybe we increase the standard on the registration side so we don't require that everybody has a photo ID, but you actually have to verify that you're a United States citizen when you register. I don't know if there would be pushback from that as well, because some people may not know their social security number. I'll tell you, I didn't when I first went to register to vote, and I had to worm my way into getting it. I didn't even have a card at that point. I didn't have a social security card until I was past 20. I had to order one when I was trying to apply for a new passport, and I was still able to do it. I didn't have to have the official card because someone else in my family at least remembered that number for me. Thank the Lord. But I do understand that there are some hurdles there, but maybe there should be some hurdles so we don't have a situation where people that are just here on work visas could actually technically vote and they're not U.S. citizens. Or we could have a situation like in D.C. where if you're in, let's be clear, we don't actually want this to happen. I'm not saying it does happen, but it could, in theory, happen where you just show up and you vote. Then again, it probably doesn't change much when it's a vote in D.C. because there's a pretty concentrated population there. So I don't necessarily think that it would sway things one way or the other, but the point being that it's something that we need to contend with. And now I want to go to the bottom part of this article because this is just the news, the one we started with that was talking about the hearings, and they kind of show their hand, but they leave it until the very last part of the article. Quote, in 2024, it is no longer an open question whether foreign nationals are registering and voting, Adams later said. Anyone would try to argue otherwise has not read the data and we have documented the problems. Quote, Adams explains that non-citizens are often added to the voter rolls through the 1993 Voter Registration Act when they are admitted even as they are non-citizens. So according to the PILF report last May, they showed that they had removed 394 foreign nationals from the city voter rolls in 2007, and 20 of them recorded casting about 85 ballots. In April 2023, the report also said that in 2015, 222 foreign nationals were removed from the county's voter rolls in Maricopa County, Arizona, with 9 of them recording casting 12 ballots. So they're giving examples here where, hey, look, people actually are voting. They are going out there and they are voting. But they also portray how small of a problem this is. And let's be clear, I'm not trying to downplay it and, oh, look at it, it's not important. No, it is important. We should have safeguards so that only citizens can vote. And that's one, because only citizens should be voting in our national elections, period. I mean, that's just a matter of principle. But two, for the sake of everybody else who doesn't have faith in the system, you want to make sure you can tell them, hey, there are as many safeguards as possible in place. We are not allowing this to happen. You don't want reports like that because guess what? While I may sit here and say, okay, out of the 300 some million people that are in the United States, they're only removing about 200 and some there, 300 and some there. And you could technically make an argument that in small municipalities that could flip some things, maybe an electoral vote if it's close to 1,000 legal votes in one location and it's a really tight race, sure, that could flip a electoral vote. Maybe, probably not, but maybe, especially if you're in one of the states that has split electors like Maine and I believe Nebraska, but those are going away here soon. So is it actually going to have the largest impact? No. But as we've seen with close elections, Biden versus Trump, the last one was pretty close. Gore versus Bush, very, very close election. So yes, these things can matter. And you don't even want to open the door. You don't want to have any of these cases come out and be able to be quoted and people say, hey, look, there's an example right there. Because it just builds skepticism in the mind of the people, and we want everybody to have faith in the system. So maybe we should actually think about tightening some things up. If you don't like the idea of having to present an ID, you can do it like New Mexico, where in order to even get on the registration, you have to provide a social security number. Now, like I said, there are still vulnerabilities to that because you could just come up and say somebody else's name and somebody else's address, but in an ideal world, most people know each other in the small localities where they are casting their vote. So there's probably going to be a push for more types of documentation in the future, and I think that honestly presenting your photo ID in order to vote is not that high of a bar. but I could at least understand the people that are skeptical of it. And there are still measures that can be taken before you have to get to that point, which could abate some of these fears in people's minds. It's a serious conversation. And it was funny because I listened to the 538 podcast, and what they said, they initially came out and they were talking about people who they were doing a census, and these people were frustrated, and they were talking about how, hey, people who are not from this nation are voting in our elections. And then the 538 goes on to say, oh well, this has been debunked ad nauseum, so on and so forth. And I sat there and said, really? Debunked ad nauseum? Because I definitely know that there are certain cases where they have proven that no, the extent to which these problems are happening are not as large as some people were portraying. I knew that was a thing, but it's outright no, they just can't vote, because that's basically what they said. And I was sitting there like myself, like, no, I've actually gone through some of this before. And then that's what caused me to go on this whole research project again, just to verify everything and bring everything out to the forefront. So I'm always happy to do something like this, do a little bit more research. I kind of like these research intensive episodes. They take more time, of course, but they're enjoyable. Going through some things, debunking some other things. I did one a little bit more research oriented last week, and probably a month and a half ago, I went through some tax returns for somebody to see where they were getting their funding from. That was actually a fun one as well. So I do enjoy this sort of thing, bringing some outside information, not just commentary. So thank you for joining me for this long one. We are going to end on our daily delight, as always. We just want to leave you with a smile on your face. So this one actually comes from it's a video, and I'll tell you now, it was absolutely hilarious when I first saw it. The headline is "Deer and Dog Play in Pennsylvania Backyard. It is too cute." And when they say it is too cute, they are not wrong. It is absolutely adorable. They're going about, they're doing their thing, they're running, and they're on opposite sides of a fence, but it's amazing to see the deer's not totally scared. He's kind of actually messing around with them. He's kind of chasing the dog, and the dog's like, whoa, 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 what's going on? What's going on? So it's fun to see these sort of things. I hope you can go take the time, go watch the video. If you read or listened to everything, you've already gone through all the other links, and you're like, wow, okay, what Alex laid out today is depressing, sad, I don't know. Some people have different adverse reactions to it. Go watch this video. And if you're a person that came out of it like, oh, well, hey, it was really fun to be here today, then you can leave on an even higher note. Go watch this Daily Delight. It's a fun video. Just like with all the articles, how I talked about, there will be links in the description. All of them, they'll be down there below the like and subscribe button. You can go see everything that I talked about here today. And with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe. Don't die.